All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating academic paper called Fragments of Meaning, Postmodernism, Neopagan Revival, and the Biblical Reordering of Reality. And it's tackling a huge question about our modern world. So let's get right into it. So take a look at this image from the paper. It really sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? You've got this modern city, this digital world, clashing with all these ancient symbols. And look at that broken path, lined with scattered books of truth. It leads from an open book of light all the way toward a glowing cross. This image just perfectly captures the core tension the paper is exploring. This battle between old certainties, our modern skepticism, and that deep, desperate search for meaning we all feel. And that really gets us to the central paradox the paper wants to unravel. Why is it that we as a culture are so skeptical of any claim to absolute truth, but at the exact same time, we're just starving for a grand story to believe in? It's a massive contradiction, you know? It's right at the heart of our time. And this paper offers a really compelling explanation. To get started, the paper identifies what it calls a modern crisis of meaning. And this isn't just some intellectual puzzle. The author sees this as the fundamental problem that's shaping our entire culture. And here's where it gets really interesting. The paper's diagnosis is that we haven't lost our ability to believe things. Not at all. The real issue, it argues, is that we've lost a shared, unifying story, that big framework that makes sense of everything else. And without that, well, our world becomes this chaotic marketplace of competing, unstable stories, all fighting for our attention and our allegiance. So, how in the world did we get here? Let's move on to the paper's diagnosis and see how it traces this collapse of our shared understanding of truth itself. The paper charts this huge intellectual shift between two eras. On one hand, you had modernity, which grew out of the Enlightenment. It promised us that we could discover universal, objective truth just by using our own reason. But then came postmodernity, which looked at that promise with deep suspicion. It came along and argued that all these so-called truths are actually just social constructions. They're stories we tell to get and keep power. And this slide really drives home the devastating consequence of that shift, which the paper puts so starkly. If every single truth claim is just a power move, then the very concept of truth just dissolves. And when that happens, forget about rational debate. Persuasion gets replaced by coercion, and real dialogue just breaks down into performance. You know, they say nature abhors a vacuum, and well, the same is true for the human heart. When a shared story of truth disappears, something has to rush in and fill that void. The paper analyzes these replacements, calling them substitute narratives. So one of these substitutes, the paper points to, is a kind of Neopagan revival. Now, this isn't about ancient rituals, so much as a modern kind of spirituality that finds the divine inside of nature and the self. It completely rejects the idea of a transcendent God who gives us some kind of external moral law. But the paper critiques this view, arguing that, hey, without that external anchor, where do you get a stable foundation for what's right and what's wrong? And here's another substitute narrative that's incredibly powerful: science fiction. The paper argues we should stop seeing sci-fi as just entertainment. It's actually functioning as a modern form of myth-making. Think about it. It gives us these epic stories about where we came from, where we're going, even our salvation. But it does it all without a God. It grounds everything in technology and human potential. This table from the paper makes the contrast so clear. Just look at the biblical story on the left. Humanity's core problem is a moral one, rebellion or sin, and the hope is for divine restoration. Now flip over to the text salvation story on the right. The problem isn't moral at all. It's just a biological limitation. And the hope? It's not divine, it's human innovation. It's the upgrade. Okay, so after diagnosing the whole problem and looking at these substitutes, the paper finally moves on to its own proposed answer. It argues that what we really need is a return to a truly unified narrative that can actually make sense of reality. The framework it lays out is this 4-act biblical story. Think of it like this. First up, creation, which establishes that the world has a built-in order and purpose. Second, you have rebellion, which explains why we experience so much moral and cosmic chaos. Third, there's redemption, the story of God's direct action in history to fix what's been broken. And finally, consummation, the promise that one day all of creation will be made completely new. And this right here is the paper's most crucial claim. This 4-part narrative isn't presented as just a better story or one option out of many. The ultimate conclusion is that this specific narrative is being proposed as the true story of reality, the single framework that actually makes sense of all the other stories and our shared human experience. Now, regardless of where you personally land on that final claim, the paper's analysis gives us a really powerful framework for understanding the world around us. So, why does all this matter for you? Well, this framework offers a new lens, right? It helps us see our fiercest cultural conflicts not just as political disagreements, but as clashes between completely different stories about what reality is. It helps explain that restless, modern search for identity, and it challenges us to ask where our ideas of morality and human dignity even come from. And it gives us a way to make sense of why we can feel so much hope and experience so much suffering, often at the very same time. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If the paper is right that we're all living inside of a story, whether we know it or not, what story do you think holds our world together? And what story holds you? It's a thought worth exploring. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.